Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Scott Buckley. I'm the Director of Marketing at Array Solutions, and I want to thank you all for joining us today. I think it's going to be a highly interesting and informative webinar. We're going to take a look at the latest methods that are being used to track tools, tactics, patterns of adversaries across the internet. And I'm joined today by Mike Piekarski. He's our senior security consultant at Array Solutions. Brandon Force, systems engineer at our partner Rapid7. We also have Ty Boyd, senior solutions engineer, also from Rapid7. If you have any questions that may come to mind as the presentation goes along, please submit them as they come to you, and we'll address them at the end of the presentation. So for now, I'm going to hand it off to Mike. Mike?
Sure. Thanks. Yeah, we'll go quick agenda here. I'm just gonna run through this very fast. We're going to talk about the Array, a Rapid7 and Array partnership a little bit, and then Brandon and Ty are going to look at what's going on in the threat landscape, some of their unique ways of providing original intelligence, and then some of their interactions among things on the dark web and really how they operate behind the scenes to add intelligence to the overall platform stack. So we'll jump forward. And really, why are we here today? Array and Rapid7, we have a really strong relationship. As many of the people on here know, Array has a bunch of partnerships, right? A bunch of different OEMs. Rapid7's one of our strategic partners for a reason, and that's what we're here to show off. So not only do we resell and implement their solutions and their tools, right? But we rely on them to help make us better. And we've actually jointly put together a joint offering called Threat Defender. That's all-in security solution that incorporates managed detection and response with patching and maintenance of the underlying vulnerabilities for our customers. And so today I'm gonna turn it over to Brandon to get us started on the Rapid7 side of things. So thanks, everybody.
Fantastic. Thanks, Mike. Hello, everybody. Good morning. Thanks for joining. Really appreciate your time today. As Scott said, my name is Brandon Force. I'm a channel SE here at Rapid7, working with our strategic partners like Array. So, before I jump in here, I want to kick things off a little bit and kind of ground us in who Rapid7 is and what sets us apart and why customers choose us as a security partner rather than just a software vendor. In the event you're not familiar with us, right? So our mission here is pretty simple. It's to help security teams really command their attack surface with as much clarity and confidence as possible, even as that attack surface grows, gets more dynamic, fragmented, and complex. So if you're not familiar with us, we've been doing this for over 20 years. We started with Nexpose, which was our on-premise vulnerability management platform. And today we support nearly 10,000 customers, including close to half the Fortune 500. And we do this through a unified platform that really spans a couple primary domains, right? And that's exposure management, detection, response, and that's of course powered by automation and threat intelligence. But what sets us apart is not necessarily the breadth of our platform, it's how it's powered, right? And that's what we're going to spend some time talking about today. So under the hood, what we'll find is original research, curated threat intelligence, and operational insight that comes directly from the front lines. And what I mean when I say that is that includes global vulnerability and threat intelligence team, the engineers behind Metasploit. If you're familiar with Metasploit, that's the most widely used defensive security framework in the world. We're the custodians of that open source tool. Dozens of in-house penetration testers and incident response experts, where we're conducting over 1,000 engagements a year. That expertise feeds directly into our platform through various research and intelligence initiatives that we're going to talk about today. We gather real-time data about global exposures and attacker behaviors, and we use it to help customers prioritize and act on what matters. And then finally, the last thing I'll mention here is, we recognize that security doesn't operate in a vacuum, right? So we've made it a point to ensure that we take an approach that allows for an open ecosystem. So integrating with the tools, workflows, and teams you will already rely on, and then enabling future investments as well. So with that, let's go ahead and jump in here. I want to take a second to kind of talk about the pace of change. In 2024 alone, we saw that nearly a third of high-profile incidents began with the exploitation of the zero-day, and that trend has largely held steady across the past 18 months. Now, historically, these kind of vulnerabilities, Heartbleed, Eternal Blue, Meltdown, these were very major events that might happen once or twice a year, but the cadence has shifted. And today we're seeing what used to be rare is now very routine, right? I think Move It was a big turning point, and the same week that that incident broke, we saw Barracuda Zero Days being exploited as well. And it wasn't just one isolated event there, it was very systemic. And this was not an outlier. This is, our new normal. So from our vantage point here at Rapid7 and from the vantage point of Rapid7 Labs, the increase is measurable, right? We used to see one major emergent threat per month, but in the past 18 months, we've averaged closer to 3 per week. So that kind of velocity demands not just detection of course that's important, but an operationalized threat intel capability as well. A capability or capabilities, I should say, that can move as fast as that threat landscape evolves. So that's why we've built a dedicated emergent threat response team, supported by nearly $100 million annually in research and development investment. Emergent threat response for us is not just a blog team, it's a cross-functional unit that spans vulnerability research, detection engineering, threat hunting, and customer communications, of course. It's not just about speed here, of course, it's also about precision, right? In 2023, we were the first to publish detection or mitigation content for nearly all of the major zero-day disclosures that we saw. And in an age of, imperfect information, being first is not enough. You also have to be right. So we're going to talk as we move along a little bit more about how this intel becomes actionable, how we're generating it, and kind of what sets us apart there. Let's quantify the pressure a little bit more, though. This is all data pulled from our 2024 attack intelligence report. And in 2024 alone, we saw nearly 6,000 leak site posts were tracked. We saw 75 unique ransomware groups that were confirmed active, and on average, 45 groups were operating in any given month. Ransom demands vary wildly, but the average demand in Q3 of last year was nearly $500,000. The median was $200K, and 32% of companies still paid. So, not theoretical figures. These are pulled directly from open source tracking, dark web monitoring, incident response engagements, and these numbers really reflect an ecosystem that is fundamentally operationalized. So developers, customer service portals, negotiation playbooks, SLAs, right? So when we're talking about threat intel, this is the caliber of insight that has to feed into your strategy, right? Let's talk one more slide here about somewhat more of what we're seeing, right? We're zooming in here on just the first quarter of 2025. In 3 months alone here, 16 new ransomware groups emerged, 13 existing ones went silent, which often doesn't mean they've stopped operating, but that they've rebranded or they've shifted infrastructure. One group we saw, Ransom Hub, was responsible for 232 extortion-related posts by itself. So again, powerful numbers here. These shifts they're not anomalies. This is the level of volatility that is becoming very much the standard. And it poses a fundamental challenge for security professionals And if our intelligence is based on last quarter's trends, then we are often behind. So when we talk about real time, this is what we mean. It's imperative that we're not waiting for a monthly or quarterly threat report to understand our exposure and understand the threat landscape. Cool. So let's take a second and talk about emergent threat response. I've mentioned this. Let's dive into this a little bit more. When a new vulnerability drops, speed is very important, but speed without substance is just noise, right? So our goal with emergent threat response is to publish immediately actionable content, which includes technical write-ups, exploitation analysis, detection artifacts, and platform-wide coverage, and not just summaries, but real intelligence there. And this is possible with Rapid7 because we're not just ingesting third-party feeds, we're also generating original research. Discovering 0 days, working directly with affected vendors. In incidents like Move It and Barracuda, our team was contributing to remediation efforts and publishing detections while a lot of other vendors were still triaging. So this work shows up in various tools that teams oftentimes already trust. Attacker KB is one of those tools we'll talk about. That's a leading public resource for real-world CVE context and exploitability. That's built and maintained by Rapid7 and our researchers. Metasploit, I mentioned that, also maintained by us, remains the most widely used exploitation and validation framework in the industry. And Velociraptor, I don't think I've mentioned that one, but that's another open source tool that Rapid7 is the custodians of. If you're not familiar with it, that's a top tier digital forensics and incident response and threat hunting platform that includes artifact exchange and curated content used by incident response teams worldwide. 0-day research. Actually, I think sorry folks, give me 1 second here. There we go. Cool. I want to take a look at a real world example of how we're executing our emergent threat response process. This is a great example of this. This is from the SysAid 0-day that happened in November of 2023. So the timeline here is what's really important and I think tells a strong story. On Wednesday, November 8th, the SysAid disclosed that a 0-day affecting their on-premise servers was being actively exploited. Less than 24 hours later, we kicked off our emergent threat response process at 2:40 p.m. on that Thursday. By 3:13 p.m., so just 33 minutes later, we had already published a technical blog. We had pushed detections into our SIM and MDR platform. We released a vulnerability check within our vulnerability management tool, Insight VM. We delivered a Velociraptor artifact for hunting, and we had a endpoint detection available as well. At 4:17 p.m., we sent proactive email communications to our customers. By 4:30, we'd shared threat intelligence with global certs. And then by 5:01, we observed active exploitation in the wild and engaged our incident response teams with impacted customers. The following day, on Friday the 10th, we incorporated updated mitigations based on revised guidance from SysAid, and our research was picked up in global press coverage. By Saturday the 11th, Rapid7 Labs had confirmed that this vulnerability was being exploited by both ransomware actors and a state-sponsored threat group. We shared those indicators and intelligence with our product teams to immediately strengthen detection and protection guidance. Strengthen detection and protection guidance. And I think the takeaway here is again, it's not just speed, it's integration. So research, engineering, detection, threat hunting, and communication, they all move together. And that's what enables our customers to understand not just the vulnerability, but the active threat landscape around it. I'll take a second here to talk about 0-day research a little bit more. So everything we just walked through, Move It, SysAid, Avanti, they're not outliers. They're examples of this broader pattern that our zero-day research team is built to address. We have a dedicated vulnerability research team that's proactively investigating software and systems that have a high likelihood of exploitation. We're not waiting for disclosure. We're actively hunting for vulnerabilities in widely deployed enterprise infrastructure, also internet exposed services, common edge technologies. In 2022 and 2023 alone, I wish I could remember the more recent data, but I'll cite those 2 years. Our team discovered and disclosed over 60 zero-day vulnerabilities. Not obscure issues there. They affected well-known technologies: Cisco ASA, Zixel firewalls, Sonic Wall, WatchGuard Firebox, and so on and so forth, right? We also identified flaws in widely used platforms like GitLab, VMware Workspace ONE, and even Microsoft Windows itself. Finding that vulnerability is just the start, though, of course. Our goal is to turn that discovery into detection and mitigation content that our customers can actually use. And the goal there is that the moment we validate a vulnerability, we start building, right? Our vulnerability management tool inside VM, we need checks there. Again, detections within the SIM, Metasploit modules, Velociraptor threat hunting artifacts, whatever's necessary to operationalize that intelligence across the environment. And then lastly here, just as importantly, we push this information back into the broader community, right? So our research often contributes to the coordinated disclosure efforts, and it's regularly cited in industry advisories and threat intelligence feeds. Let's talk about attacker KB a little bit. I mentioned this, but let's talk about it a little bit more in depth. So once a vulnerability is disclosed, the immediate question becomes, does it matter and to who? Attacker KB is our open intelligence platform built to answer that, right? So here we're going beyond CVSS scores, and we're surfacing up context, practical insight, right? Is this being exploited in the wild? How valuable is this to an attacker? What's the real risk to your environment? Each CVE entry includes technical analysis from our researchers and red teamers, scoring attributes like attack complexity, privileges required, and user interaction, right? So there's also a lot of metadata that accompanies this, mappings to MITRE ATT&CK. There's just a wealth of information here. It's fully accessible via an open API, which allows our customers to integrate this intelligence into their own vulnerability management workflows, whether that's risk scoring, patch prioritization, or IOC enrichment. Open data. So Rapid7's open data program exists to support the broader security community, not just our customers, with very high fidelity and internet scale telemetry. So the core piece here that I want to talk about is Project Sonar. This is where we're conducting regular scans across the entire public IPv4 address space, right? So these scans are looking for exposure patterns across common services and protocols, helping identify systemic risk, right? Project Lorelei. This is a really cool one. This is a global honeypot network, right? Here we are collecting attacker telemetry data. We're assessing what are attackers actually exploiting in the wild. Oftentimes we're actually spinning up new honeypots based on emerging threats and collecting that telemetry so that we can feed it back into our platform, right? And we actually see this intelligence as well as the rest of the intelligence I'm talking about, right? It not only informs our approach as a company, but it also finds its way back into our products, right? So an area we may see this kind of telemetry is within our vulnerability management solution, where we have data on, hey, these are the vulnerabilities that we're seeing in your environment that are actively being exploited in the wild. Just a quick call out here. I think this is important to mention too, we're also an active member of multiple threat intelligence and industry collaboration groups, right? The big one here is the Cyber Threat Alliance. Other major names such as Palo Alto, Fortinet, they're also members of that Cyber Threat Alliance. And these memberships give us access to shared intelligence across sectors, but more importantly for us at least, they also allow us to contribute back, right? When our team discovers a zero-day, sees novel exploitation techniques, identifies widespread scanning, that intelligence gets fed back into these trusted channels that helps other organizations respond faster, right? So it's a two-way street, and part of how we help raise the bar beyond not just our own platform. So everything we just covered here, honeypots, internet-wide scanning, zero-day research, incident response engagements, all this feeds into a single intelligence pipeline. That pipeline supports, again, both product content and also human decision-making. It powers vulnerability prioritization, as I mentioned, behavioral detections, automated hunting, and proactive alerting during emergent threat events. So it's not just about having the data, it's about turning that data into action across multiple layers of defense in real time. There's a lot more we can talk about here, and in upcoming sessions, we're going to be taking a deeper look at how this intelligence actually looks within the Rapid7 portfolio, how we're actually leveraging this and operationalizing this. But I want to take a second here to turn it over to my counterpart, Ty, because threats, again, they don't just start at the endpoint. They start on the outside, right? Cross forums, marketplaces, dark web infrastructure. And that's what Ty's going to walk us through next, is how Rapid7 helps customers detect and respond to these external threats.
Yep, appreciate that, Brandon. That being said, I'll just qualify a little bit more about my experience. Prior to Rapid7, I worked in military intelligence for almost 20 years, used a lot of tools, a lot of capabilities, operating in a lot of spaces that oftentimes when you talk about creating intelligence, data set is important. And a lot of the data set that we discussed today, unfortunately, is on the clear web. Some of it may be in the deep web, but there's a whole nother data set on the dark web that if you're not savvy on accessing that area and knowing the methodologies and protocols that operate in that space, that can be a challenge. So as indicated on the slide that you see here, the larger proponent of the internet is actually dark web, right? So the indexable internet that we search every day is a small component. When we look at that data set, right, there's a larger data set and possibly more actionable intelligence at the other tiers of the internet. So what Rapid7 is very capable at doing is getting deep level access to the dark web, right? Understanding the nature and the intricacies of the dark web. We'll go more into that on the next slide. All right. Now, when you talk about the external threat protection, and again, that dark web operation that Rapid7 associates with, you have to understand that operating with personas, with trust, and avatars in these spaces are very, very important. Unlike clear web, where you can index it, search it very easily, the dark web is not that easy for a variety of reasons. Anonymity is important. Non-attribution is very important on the dark web. So most threat actors do whatever they can, or even the infrastructure itself is not very designed and equipped to be indexed very well. So it requires that expertise, that trust to get in these deep level forms where a lot of the transactions between nefarious threat actors are taking place. Rapid7 acquired a company about 5-6 years ago who specialized in that capability. There were individuals like myself, prior military experience. They were trained. They have a professionalized OSINT, open source intelligence, tradecraft methodology, and they are able to maintain very deep level access to the dark web. We provide those insights in the form of alerts to our customer base. Next slide. All right. And it all requires a shift of mindset, right? So understanding prevention, they say an ounce of prevention equals a pound of cure. So when you can get ahead of a threat and you can be proactive rather than reactive, which unfortunately in the cyber security landscape, it often feels like we're in reactionary mode. But however, external threat intelligence kind of flips that paradigm for some time, right? It allows you to kind of have these indications of attack prior to it taking place, whether it be an initial access broker selling access to your organization, ransomware as a service, your name coming up in these forums, is important for you to get ahead of the attack, understanding the nature of assessing a threat. There's always three components, and that's the intent of the threat actor, the opportunity, and the capability, right? And understanding that intent and capability comes into play with understanding what's happening on the dark web. Next slide, please. Here's the process that we look at here. So we are Rapid7's collecting data points from a variety of different sources, clear, deep, and dark web. When you understand the intelligence lifecycle, the collection is a strong component, but you need that level of analysis. With Rapid7, we have the analysis being done through automation, but also through that OSINT experienced analyst tradecraft that gets embedded with all of our customer base as well. And then that analysis data set reaching into analysis provides you to have intelligence, right? So think about intelligence is always known as a force multiplier. In a world where we have infinite time and infinite resource, intelligence may not be necessary. However, in a world where we don't have that, like in cyberspace or in any operations, that intelligence allows you to focus your effort to get the most impact, whether it be risk mitigation or just effort of effectiveness with what you need to do, at what time to do it, and how to do it, get it done, right? So that is the difference between that information, that data that turns into information, but then becomes operationalized with action, turns into intelligence. So next slide, please. Here are some use cases that we do support. Although I did focus heavily on the dark web, and we'll go later into certain slides on it, we are operating multiple use cases and problem sets around threat intel, whether it be impersonation events, social media, brand security related things, phishing monitoring, so type of squat domains, also external attack surface management concerns, so understanding your digital footprint, understanding some of those technologies that may have exposure elements of risk, and also, again, operating on the dark web and those point-to-point encryption channels to see what's being said, to bring up that level of indication of an attack. Next slide. All right, so we, again, like to say Intel is the connective tissue between your program overall. It enhances the capability of most functionality in cybersecurity. And again, that helps us in a world where we may not have the unlimited time and unlimited resources. Next slide. And the external atmospherics, right? So understanding, know your enemy, right? One of the art of war tenets. You got to know your enemy. You got to have to understand the landscape. And one of the reasons why it's important is because the landscape is very dynamic. So in a world where the evolving landscape is dynamic, to have a static defensive posture isn't a contemporary opportunity at this time, or a contemporary luxury, as I would say. You have to be dynamic when it comes to pivoting in the environment as well. Moving on to dark web, right? Next slide. So what you see on the slide is just authentic post on the dark web. And what I want to emphasize here is that what makes the dark web so dangerous for a company is that it doesn't necessarily matter if the person that's targeting you has that capability. That capability can be acquired. So when we talk about assessing that threat, intent, opportunity, and capability, right? That capability can be purchased or can be outsourced at any given time, right? So there's ransomware as a service, there's hacker as a service, there's a lot of as a service malicious activity going on in the dark web. So again, if someone has access to the dark web and they have that intent and they have the opportunity, because again, time is, in a world where someone has enough time, and if you think of the APT acronym, it's important to focus on that middle letter, which is persistent, right? So even if they don't have that technical acuity, the persistence and the motivation can allow them to acquire that or outsource it to someone else. So this is an example of a hacker for hire. So if you had access to the dark web, you will be able to purchase this without a problem. Next slide, please. This slide just shows, if you're not familiar with the nature of the dark web, and you may have a natural question, okay, we understand the dark web, why are we allowing this activity to occur? So the Tor onion router, right? If you're not familiar with that, it allows for anonymity through the same routing functionality as a typical protocol or TCP/IP networks, right? So what you'll see, even if you look at the domains and the URLs, you see they're auto-generated. So there is a dynamic nature, and they also constantly are pivoting. So for one, not easy to guess. You can't just guess the domains and URLs used on the dark web that's used for anonymity, but also they're constantly rotating off of infrastructure to make it very difficult to detect, obfuscate, or make it easier to obfuscate, but also detect the infrastructure. So when you are operating on the dark web, operations are very time sensitive. So even if something's being sold related to your organization or company, it's important that you have an agent that can operate very quickly and timely to either mitigate the risk to acquiring what's there or possibly notifying you, right? Rapid7 specializes in not just notifying you of the risk on the dark web, but we also allow you to take that step further in the risk management capability of mitigating, right? So if an initial access broker is selling information or selling access to your organization, Rapid7 does have the means to go out and acquire that access and bring it back to you securely, with the goal of you mitigating that risk, whether it's an active credential in your environment, changing that credential, or if there's some type of command and control endpoint beaconing out, RCE, remote code execution going on, we will be able to help you engage in that incident response effort. Next slide. Right, another example, or this is a very famous ransomware group, CLOP. They were very famous, infamous, if you would, for some time on the internet. They offer their services to individuals that are willing to pay. They were very active on the dark web, and again, that is a capability that can be outsourced to others with that intent of targeting your organization. Next slide. All right. And to give you an idea of what's being sold on the dark web and the general cost, I would say in my experience of operating on the dark web, I was very surprised at the things you can buy on the dark web. Some of the nefarious things are pretty just common, but like you can potentially buy body parts and just a bunch of other things that initially, when I've operated in this space in my other career, I didn't even think there was a market for those things. But if it's a need and there's a supply, there's probably a market somewhere. And if that market is illegal, then that market's probably living on the dark web. So again, not just malicious cyber threat actors, but just a lot of things are being sold on the dark web, and they're relatively inexpensive, right? So you see some of the price points here. It's not going to cost a prohibitive amount for you to move forward and take action in these forums. And I will also tell you that oftentimes what's posted in these forums are accurate, like the elements are true and accurate. And the reason why that has to be the case is crowdsourcing and reputation is important. And it's kind of a interesting, ironic element to it, right? That threat actors and cyber criminals have to have some level of integrity. And that integrity is needed for their reputation to operate in these forums. that are known to establish themselves as reputable forms for doing malicious activity. Again, an ironic element, but yes, like oftentimes when I'm working with clients and they mention, hey, something's being sold, what's the possibility of it being accurate? I have to say is at a high degree of accuracy, especially in certain forums where when again they have to maintain a high reputation. So think of like before you purchase something for on any site that you can buy from. I'm not going to use any brand names on this call, but you think of like if you go buy something online, you may look at the reviews before you buy it. So that's similarly before business is transacted on the dark web, reputation is maintained. So it's important for these threat actors to keep level of credibility. So a lot of things that are offered on the dark web are actually authentic. Next slide, please. All right. So another example again, showing the rates and the just reviews on the sellers, right? So again, very important to understand that these aren't illegitimate threats when you see these elements on the dark web. Next slide. All right. And just giving you an idea, right? So one of the known eBay, right? You think about eBay, how they operate. Think of that as a similar operational protocol on the dark web. Next slide. All right. To give you an idea of some of the capabilities you can buy, right? So buying exploits, 0 days is sold, bots, right? So if you ever wanted to do a DDoS attack, you can buy a whole bot network to engage in that. If you want to mine cryptocurrency, access for sale, those initial access brokers, I see that a lot in my dealings with threat intelligence customers with Rapid7. A lot of organizations have initial access being sold on the dark web. So yeah, we can help with all of the potential risk vectors that you see here. Next slide. All right. So also insider threat, right? So is an element. We understand insider threats are very concerning because their level of understanding and just physical access in the environment. We also do detect against those type of risk vectors. So if we do see a nexus when it comes to insider threat, we can expose that activity, which can lead to further investigations. Next slide. The PII, PHI, we understand, especially in certain sectors, not only is it a risk implication against the customer base, but also it may be regulatory. So depending on the industry that you operate in, it's even more imperative that you understand the data set or even the risk profile in these forms, because again, it's going to have more of a reputation, not only a reputational damage, but also a regulatory compliance element to that as well. Next slide. Third-party risk, right? So third-party risk is a thing as well. So I have seen a variety of cases that threat actors are targeting third parties just to gain access to the interdependencies with their main target, right? So whether it's interconnection with networks, right? So you may have networks, M&As. I would tell you that if you have an M&A or it's public M&A, you definitely want to be aware of that, because what we see is threat actors will, understanding that one company may not have the level of controls and level of cybersecurity hygiene. What they will do is to target that company, understanding that once that merger happens, that environment may not have the visibility, and that may allow them to laterally move into said environment. So there's been multiple cases of agents not being deployed or rolled out in a timely fashion during the M&A, and because that agents aren't there, that's a blind spot. And now the incumbent or the larger company that has a more mature cybersecurity posture runs into a breach situation because of that interdependency risk. So this also exists again on the dark web, where you may not be a main target, you may be a collateral risk target, whether Also, I've seen cases where your server can be used as a hot point to store exfiltrated data, right? So just having that, not having the protocols and controls in place, a threat actor will pre-position data on your server and then later pick it up when it's more convenient for them, or less eyes on, or less tracking. So I've seen that as well. So oftentimes that happens in the space of SMBs or companies that are in public that say, oh, we don't really have a large public profile. Well, that doesn't mean, for one, you don't have a third party risk implication, right? You do business with someone, right? So like in the hospital space, or even using real world example, the Target breach, the threat actors breached the HVAC company to gain access to the Target network, right? So that's a perfect example of that. Next slide. Let's see, where are we at? Credentials. Okay, so we're credentials, right? So we understand credential leaks are important. I like to say this is a high frequency event, but when a lot of false positives in this space, a lot of repurposing of credentials, posting on the dark web. However, it is a high impact event when it is true, right? So we see customers kind of get a lull of kind of alert fatigue around credentials, especially if they keep seeing the same old credentials posted, and then they may not take the real threat of an active credential as important as they should. That being said, Rapid7 does have an automated validation process for lead credentials, so we can help with combating that alert fatigue from these events when it comes to lead credentials. Next slide. Here's some general recommendations, right? So Rapid7 does have a Azure Active Directory integration tie-in for validation of lead credentials. We can automate that process and either lock the account or prompt the user to change their password in the event there is an active user identified. Next slide. All right, we talked about the as of service, and that again leads to that element of threat assessment, right? Of understanding that your threat adversary may not necessarily need the capability, right? Because that capability is readily outsourced from cyber criminal elements. So we do have a lot of as a service malicious activity. Ransomware as a service is big. DDoS as a service, very important. A lot of things are happening. And with AI is adding another element of capability with that as well, where now you can outsource, or you can use certain large language models like Worm GPT. That was one for a while that was out here, where you can use that to write very specifically crafted phishing emails to companies. So again, making it even more difficult to detect certain malicious activity. Next slide. Right, the moral of the story, or the TLDR, is everything's for sale, right? So understanding you have a very, very difficult job defending a network, right? So although we have a lot of visibility and controls internally, when you look at the MITRE ATT&CK framework, the first 3 steps of MITRE ATT&CK has nothing to do with your internal network, right? It's threat actors conducting recon, building resources, and building or weaponizing whatever they find, and then trying to gain initial access. So those 2 or 3 steps, if you're only looking internal, you have no visibility on what's happening when it comes to recon on your organization, or just generally like resource development. And I'll use a real example. One thing that we can help you identify is just the level of frequency of typo squat domains. We have a customer that had a baseline of about 10 typo squat domains per quarter that they expect to see. One quarter, that 10 multiplied almost by 10, so they had almost 100 of these typo squat domains registered. Now they were not operationalized yet, but you could see the pattern of just the registration of these similar domains. That prompted them to reach out to the FBI. At that point, the FBI, because they were critical infrastructure, they got involved, and they were able to they were able to confirm attribution of an APT nation state threat actor on the beginning stages on the onset of targeting the organization, right? So that was something that they were able to pull just from just the level of frequency and a baseline of this external activity taking place. Next slide. All right, so doxing, this is more of a physical threat here, and digital extortion. We understand this is big, especially if you're, there was a couple of sites that were breached and they were able to hold extortion to key executives and things to that effect. Doxing information happens all the time as well. A lot of that can be purchased on the dark web or can at least be detected on the dark web. Next slide. All right, so these are some of the capability offerings when we talked about intelligence, right? So Intelligence Hub, Threat Command, Managed Digital Risk Protection, which brings that additional expertise into the operations, and also the Metasploit Pro framework, right? So all of these, all of the listed offerings are going to offer a unique value proposition when it comes to threat intelligence, whether it be impersonation of key executives on social media to understanding of validating the exploitation of vulnerabilities, which you can do in Metasploit Pro. At this time, I'll pass it back over to Brandon to see if he has any parting words or last steps or final steps, if you would. I know we have a Q&A portion, so at this point, I'll be standing by if anyone has any questions.
Thanks so much, Ty. Yeah, that was really all I had. So I guess we will go ahead and move to Q&A and see what we've got.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Ty. What an incredibly fascinating topic. Just unbelievable. Thanks for sharing your expertise and those insights with us. We do have one question that came in, and guys, you still have time to submit your questions. Just submit them in the Q&A panel. Let me drag my panel over here, and let's see. So this question is related to the recent SharePoint 0 Day. So this, I think, is going to be, I guess it could be for all three, well, mostly for the Raptor 7 guys. Would you create a SharePoint servers in Project Lurley to see how it's being exploited in the wild, given the ongoing SharePoint exploit campaign that's going on?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I will say first, I'm not sure in specificity how we're handling that today, but in general, that is how we would approach that type of scenario, is absolutely trying to emulate the particular exploit. And I would say with a high degree of certainty that that's exactly what we're doing, so that we can collect the relevant telemetry and make sure that that's getting fed back into the platform. So again, don't know the exact specifics of what that looks like today, but I would imagine that's exactly how we're approaching that, because that is typically how we would handle those types of scenarios. Ty, I don't know if you have anything to add on to that.
No, nothing else to add. I think you said it very eloquently that yes, absolutely. I expect that to be a capability that we do set up. Now, being that we don't want to tip the adversary's hand to let them know that we're cybersecurity researchers, we don't typically publicize too much around those things, but I would say absolutely that's probably going on with a high degree of certainty.
Cool. Thanks, guys. All right, last question that I've got here is a simple one, asking whether we will be able to share the slide deck with attendees of this webinar.
Absolutely. That's not a problem. We can share that out.
Perfect. Okay, so I'll be following up with everybody with a copy of the deck, also a link to the recording of the webinar that you can watch again if you want, or share with your colleagues, of course. And with that, I don't see any other questions that have come in, so I will wrap it up by thanking everybody for spending your time with us today. Have a great rest of your day, the rest of the summer, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks so much, everybody.
You guys.